Recording. So hi, Sarah. As you know, I'm Christina Papadimitriou, and this is a chat and a presentation that we're doing for the 5650 course called Social Determinants of Health at Oakland University in the School of Health Sciences. For the students, I want you to know that I've been interacting with Sarah for a while to put together a presentation for you today that speaks directly to some of your interests on understanding the American food system, and in particular, its relationship to social determinants of health. I'm delighted to learn from Sarah, who I understand to be a resident expert at the School of Health Sciences in the nutrition program. And I hope that if we have particular questions that I can't answer, because I'm not an expert at this, that we can direct our questions to you, Sarah, in a focused way. We're not just going to start sending you emails, but hopefully in a focused way.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I know some of the students in your class are previous students of mine, so hello out there. I miss you all. And I appreciate it. So let's see what we're going to learn about today. Now, when you asked me to talk about this, I will say it felt like, oh man, this is like a whole semester worth of information. So it's hard to narrow down. So I did the best I could to focus and not be all over the place on this. And so what we're going to look at today is really looking at the historical governmental policies and food programs and how that's created our current food system. We're going to talk about our current programs, our current policy, and how that's shaping food access. And then how is that playing into social determinants of health and the current food system and individual food choices. And then what possible programs, how do we improve this system? So let's look at a little history here of our food regulations and programs. So before I jump into that, I want to tell you what I mean by food system. And so often when we say food system, it may be easy to think at the very end here, the part that most people are interacting with, the retailers, so grocery stores and restaurants. And you think, okay, that's the food system. But the food system is really this huge, huge thing. So the World Health Organization defines it as the network needed to produce, transform food, and ensure it reaches the consumer. So you can think of that as production, so maybe agricultural practices. There's also the buyers, the storage, the shipping. All of these are huge industries with a lot of money and a lot of desire to make more money. And then you have the processing. And so the processing might be something like these apples, I think. So we have an apple farm here, and then we have buyers and storage and shipping. And often it's not the grocery store buying these. Typically it's specific buyers that are out buying all the apples, and they're buying for a group purchasing organization. And there's predetermined contracts of what they're going to buy and what the farmer is growing. And so it's not how we think of buying food. It's very predetermined. And then we have the processing. So you might process and just send it as an apple, or you might continue to process and send it on to manufacturers and packaging. So you might have here, we have some applesauce. It might also be used for like apple, ingredients in a Nutri-Grain bar or something like that. And then you have distribution in this country, which food distribution in this country, just like everything else in this country, is driven by capitalism. So again, it's not going directly to the grocery store. You go through distributors that are buying from the manufacturers. Commonly, there's agreed upon contracts of what will be bought, what products, and then they are working with the retailers on what will be bought. So there's a lot of middlemen in our food system. And with all those middlemen, it does take more money for each of them to be paid. So we'll come back to that in a bit. And so that's the current food system. That's what a food system is. So let's think about all the factors that have come to form our food system. So it's certainly more than government. There's so many things that have come together to form our food system. And so this was part of where I was struggling. I was like, oh my God, how do I summarize this in just a few slides. So I did the best I could. So one of our big things, geography and climate. And so in the US, we have the plains, right? There are the Great Plains. Many of our native communities lived on these Great Plains as hunter-gatherer tribes, as agricultural tribes. And now these plains are used for our farming industries. And these plains are excellent, excellent farming soils. And so we are able to grow massive amounts of food in this country. And then, of course, we also have our coastlines, and we have a lot of different climates that grow all different foods. And then, of course, our native people that were original to this land, much of the food we eat today is actually from their agricultural practices and food sources. So it's actually estimated, Christina, that 40% of the world's food actually originated from the people of the Americas between North and South America. So if you think about it, what was originated here, and not just growing, these were foods that were cultivated by these original peoples intentionally, is corn, tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, really huge parts of our food system, squashes, melons. I mean, just massive parts of our food system were actually cultivated by native peoples.
I did not know that. Thank you.
It's actually when you look at the what foods are eaten, they actually most of them originated in the Americas, and that was a huge pull for why so many people began coming to the Americas, is that it was known that there was food here, that there was mass amounts of food, that the food was plentiful, and easier to come by. And so that was actually a huge pull for immigration waves, which also, of course, have impacted our food system. So we know, of course, waves of immigration have come to the US to create American food. And I have spaghetti and meatballs here because it's just an example of this is not Italian food. This is American food because spaghetti and meatballs didn't exist in Italy, but Italian immigrants made spaghetti and meatballs. So it is a American food, even though you think of it as Italian food. And I'm sure, Christina, there's a lot of Greek food that you could describe to us that have become Americanized Greek food. I think like the gyro at the Coney Island probably is different than the gyro, which I have to tell you is one of my favorite foods. So, Coney Island.
In Greece, we have a version of spaghetti and meatballs as well. I don't know. It's just a thing we have.
Yeah,
And
I love it. And so this has shaped our food system, but of course, other things have shaped our food system as well. So we know, of course, the forced slavery. Many of the enslaved African people were forced to work in kitchens. And so much of our cuisine culture actually comes from African cooking styles. So gumbos, fried food, things like that. And then a lot of the ingredients were married with the native people's food using African cooking practices, and then a lot of European cooking practices that kind of all combined together. And then also a lot of land grants were happening as well. And we're going to talk about that in a few more slides. But of course, land was taken from native people and turned into land that was sold for farming. And this all happened along with this capitalism. So we've had capitalism in this country that encourages commodity markets, encourages food manufacturing, and it also encourages overselling, overeating, because the more you manufacture, the more you want to sell, and you're not making just enough. You're wanting people to get more because you want more money. And so this is fairly unique to American Western cultures, where many cultures around the world see food as a shared commodity. So there's no reason to overproduce, overproduce, overproduce. And so that's what's kind of created our commodity markets. And then, of course, technology and transportation and food processing has all really shaped our food system as well, along with the rise of our consumer culture. More, more, more service, service, service. So that is a lot of factors. But we're going to focus on the governmental factors, which of course are many as well. And so the government has been involved in developing this food system since the beginning of the government. I mentioned land grants. So in the earlier 1800s, it started to be that, land was being stolen from native peoples. They were forced to move, and the land was then given or granted to farmers to produce food. And so it's been part of the government's job to produce food since the beginning of our government. And that continues with financing support for farmers, with continuing with land grant colleges. Michigan State was the first land grant college, and also encouraging agricultural specialization with these land grants. So not just letting farmers, grow a wide variety of foods, really that mono agriculture encouraged, where you're seeing farms that just produce corn, just produce wheat, things like that. And then another role our government has had is, of course, war and conflict, creating these massive need for commodity foods and food technology. Of course, feeding, um, you know, thousands and thousands of soldiers across the sea is a real food technology problem. And so a lot of our food technology, and of course, leading to our ultra processed foods, actually comes from conflict. A little fun anecdote is the first canned food, when people figured out how to can food, actually comes from Napoleon's wars. He put out a reward for whoever could figure out how to feed his troops. And so they figured out how to can soup in champagne bottles, and they realized they could keep this shelf stable. And that was the beginning of canned food, was actually feeding Napoleon's troops. And it's thought that's why he was able to be so successful, is because he figured out how to keep his troops fed on the road. And then, of course, there's other things. So lobbyists are plentiful in every area, and they are plentiful in the food industry. So there's agricultural lobbyists, there's food production lobbyists, there's food manufacturer lobbyists, there's the restaurant lobbyists. A lot of people are looking to make money and making sure that the regulations allow them to make money. Of course, our good old tariffs. So ever prevalent in the news right now, and you may be hearing how, all these tariffs, and now it's more expensive coffees and tropical fruits, and trying to bring in foods from other countries is much more expensive because of the tariffs. In addition, countries have retaliatory tariffs, and now where do we send all these soybeans that we used to be selling to China, but now they're mad and they won't buy our soybeans, so things like that. And then the Farm Bill, which we're going to get into in a second, but the Farm Bill is this massive piece of regulation that really shapes our food security in this country. So I have some fun little dates here, but basically the history of food and drug regulations in the US is pretty darn old. So it goes back to 1820. So right, in the first, few decades of the US forming, there started to be regulations around food. And so 1862, I would say the second coolest thing that Abraham Lincoln did was he created the USDA. And that was the start of trying to regulate agriculture and trying to bring food security to the people. I'm not going to read these verbatim, but if you're interested, there you go. And so one of the first examples of social determinants of health interacting with our food system was actually the publication of The Jungle. And so this is so someone named Upton Sinclair. He was a very you might call him left-wing now, but he was a socialist that was a investigative reporter, and he spent several weeks kind of undercover in the Chicago meatpacking district. And his goal was to expose how poorly the immigrants and the lower income classes were being treated and how hard their lives were. But really what everyone was outraged about was how unsanitary the meatpacking plants seemed to be. And so in 1906, The Jungle was published, and it was supposed to be commentary on how our society was treating the poor. But the biggest thing that came out of it was one of the first meat inspection acts came out. It was shortly after. So actually it's one of the biggest examples of like when people started to see like, oh, this is really not good to have such poverty running our food systems. And then, of course, things progressed, and you get things like the Food Nutrition and Labeling Act, which started in 1990, where you started to have nutrition labels, things like that, and a lot of regulations around our food system with the goal of making it safer. I wouldn't say necessarily healthier, but safer so that people weren't poisoned or people weren't dying of botulism, things like that. So that very brief history can lead us into the current food regulations and programs. And there are a ton, and it is all over the place. So it would be easy to think, I think, from an outsider that there must be one little agency doing all of our food regulations. So this long history of kind of like scrappy random bills and all these lobbyists and things like that have ended up with many agencies oversee our food system. And so the USDA oversees what I call the fresh foods. So they inspect and grade meat, make sure it's safe. They are in charge of dairy, including milk, butter, cheese, and then our grains, vegetables, and fruits. So kind of the whole foods. But then the FDA is in charge of the manufacturing of foods, the food labeling, the food additives, any research, inspections, things like that. The FDA is going to run that. The CDC is in charge of the food safety aspect, though, tracking foodborne illnesses, reporting foodborne illnesses. The EPA is what allows our pesticides on the plant. So I know that's really important for a lot of people to understand, is this organic? Is it not organic? The Department of Commerce is in charge of fish. I, for the life of me, don't know why, but they have the fish. The USDA has the meats. And then Department of Treasury has the alcohol. Again, I really don't know why this is a long history of just never was it ever just created. It's just bits and pieces here and there, and that's how it remains. And then any type of marketing, things like that is controlled by the FTC. And so the FDA has a huge swath of what it's in charge of. So here's a big, huge list. And you can see that in this list, dietary supplements are regulated kind of, they're not really regulated, but they're kind of regulated by the FDA. I'd say loosely regulated, as well as the food supply, the safety and security of the food supply, with exception to not stepping on USDA's toes of their foods. And then they also do a lot of research and education around food and nutrition. And the FDA holds the food code. And so the food code is what regulates our food system of what is allowed in and what is allowed out. So if I were to open this up, let me see if I can share this screen. I'm going to share a new screen really quick. Here we go. If I were to open this up, so here is the FDA codes. So these aren't technically laws, they're regulations, which is a little different, but you need a little less agreement to get them passed. So they're easier to get changed because they're not laws. They don't have to, like, the schoolhouse special, I'm only a bill. They don't have to go through the whole process. They're just regulations. And so the food code is kept here. And there is so much to this food code. It is insane. It gets so intense. And so you would find here all the regulations around food labeling, all the regulations around what type of additives, how a food may be defined. So we have what's called standards of identity in this country. So for instance, mayonnaise, I don't know, that just came to my mind. Mayonnaise has to be a specific, it has to have oil, it has to have a fat, it has to have an emulsifier, it has to have an acid. So once back in my previous life, I was working with food manufacturers, as you know, and someone had a product called Just Mayo, but it was made out of pea protein. And so it didn't technically meet the standard of identity from the FDA. So they received a cease and desist letter that they had to actually change the name of their product because the mayonnaise food lobbyists did not like that they were calling their product mayonnaise because it was made out of peas, and that wasn't correct. And so there are actual laws or actual legal actions that take place around a lot of things that you wouldn't think is so intense. And so there are regulations around every single, any type of food. And if I went to any one of these, go to canned fruits, you can see that the regulations, we'll just scroll through so you can see this is the regulations around canned fruits. So there is an enormous amount of regulations around our food system. Isn't this insane? You'd think, who could ever talk about canned fruits this much? The government. And so that shapes what we eat quite a bit. Let's go back to sharing the right screen. Okay. Did I share? Good. Okay.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
And so the FCA does a lot of regulations, but the USDA plays a huge role in our food system as well. And so they have a lot of things they're doing. So the USDA created back in the 1860s. Original goal was to ensure that our farmers were going to be able to continue, that our farmers would be secure in this highly risky business because farming is risky. You might lose crops, you might have I can't think of the word. When it doesn't rain. What am I thinking of? Drought. Sorry.
It's okay. Droughts.
You might have droughts, you might have failed crops. So the USDA was really put in place to ensure that our farming system would be able to make it. And so from there, you ended up with this really massive piece of our government. And they're stated from their website, what they're doing. So farm production conservation. So they offer crop insurance, again, making sure that if someone's soy crop fails, that they still have money. Conservation programs, farm safety, lending, disaster programs. You also have food, nutrition, and consumer services. So this is basically the government takes the crops that are made and ensures that the crops always have somewhere to go. We'll talk about that more in a second. They also do food safety, of course, only to their things, not the FDA's things. So they're just doing the meat, poultry, eggs, dairy, things like that. Marketing and regulatory programs, natural resource and environment. So they are in charge of making sure that our land stays good to farm, to have forestry, things like that. And then research and education. This is where a lot of grant funding comes from. Helping to interact with our academia to understand what's driving our agriculture, what's driving our environment, and then also rural development, trade, and foreign agriculture. So quite a bit. And from the USDA comes this Farm Bill, which the Farm Bill, I was always taught, this is how it was explained to me, the Farm Bill really rules our food system and our food security. And so if you were to ever want something changed with SNAP or WIC or any type of food program, you would go to the Farm Bill to change it. And so the Farm Bill is this really large multi-year law that's been going on since the 30s, the 1930s, so almost 100 years. And it comes around every 5 years, is supposed to be updated and provided every 5 years. This is the budget, and this is what we're going to do for the next 5 years. We're in a really funky place right now because our last 5-year cycle ended in 2023, and then it was given a year extension, and now we're on another year extension. And as some of you may know, if you've been watching the news, we can't seem to agree on anything And so again, we're coming to 2026 and we still don't have a proper farm bill. And so we know that this is really devastating, that we can't get a proper farm bill to fund and further these advances in our agriculture. And so if it was running well, this is typically where you have opportunity. You know, every 5 years, you're supposed to be able to change things to address food issues, to address agricultural issues. And this farm bill is massive. So here's a snapshot of how much money, and this is in the millions. So when you see this number for nutrition, this is actually $1 trillion as what they budgeted to spend on our nutritional programs and what they spend on the commodities and what they spend on conservation and crop insurance. And so if you look here, a little depressing number on this slide is that it's projected that they are going to start spending a lot less on nutritional services because SNAP-Ed was unfortunately taken away from us. And a lot of our food assistance programs are being slowly defunded. And of course, we know SNAP is really kind of is one of the things that's breaking my heart right now, Christina, is to see people not receiving their SNAP dollars. Christina knows this about me, that I actually work as a dietitian on the side with people on Medicaid. And so I work with lower income people that are on SNAP. And so a lot of my clients right now actually don't have any food to eat, which it's really hard to like educate on diabetes when someone is just at a food pantry. So that stinks. And so what is that big $1 trillion budget for? That farm bill coming from the USDA is how our Social Security net for food in this country is funded. So we have SNAP, that Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We have WIC, it's Women, Infants, and Children. Oh gosh, I should have left myself a note on what these actually stand for, but it's our commodity foods. So these are our commodity food programs, which is really important. The commodity food programs ensures that our farmers have somewhere to sell their food, and then this food is taken and supplied to our child nutrition programs and our institutions. So it's mostly going to schools. It does go to prisons a little bit. It goes to military a little bit, but our institutions that the government's in charge of buys the farm products. If there was anything that wasn't bought on the market, they'll buy that. This program also is how our food banks have consistent food. And so food banks aren't totally dependent on donations. The government ensures our commodity foods go to the food bank. So that's why if you went down to Gleaners, you would see pallets and pallets of canned tomatoes. Those weren't donated. The government bought those commodities and then gave them to the emergency food allocators, locations, food banks, food pantries, things like that. And then you have our child nutrition program. So this includes the good old school lunch, National School Lunch Program. It also includes the breakfast lunch or breakfast program and the summer feeding programs, as well as child care programs. So if you have lower income child care, they're commonly receiving food from the government. You also have our nutrition policy and promotion. So this is where our dietary guidelines come from, this bill from the USDA. And then a nutrition assistant program blocks. This is similar to SNAP and commodities, but it's for US territories. And so who's on SNAP? A large number of people are on SNAP. And so this map shows you what percent of residents are on SNAP. And we have 41 million people, 12.3%. So about 1 in 8 people in the US are on SNAP. And you also have very large participation in other programs. So the child nutrition program, let's see, in 2023, they served 9 billion meals, about 29 million children. So National School Lunch Program is super important to our food security and really helps define our food system. WIC, 6.7 million people. Now that sounds like a lot less, but that's 41% of infants in the US are on WIC. And so what do these programs do? oh, excuse me, what are the requirements for these programs? These are all based on income. So SNAP is based on income. There are also a lot of other requirements that in the nutrition world are often felt undue and unnecessary. But a lot of these requirements have been added in over the years. And so now we're at the point where you have to have a gross income less than 130% of the poverty line, a net income is 100% of the poverty line. You have to have work requirements where you're trying to work, you're not volunteering, you have to take a job, all these really honestly tough requirements to meet. WIC is similar, again, determined by the poverty line, but they allow a little bit higher. So 185% of the poverty index will qualify you for WIC. And then nutritional risk, that's the easiest thing to meet because everyone's at nutritional risk in this country, but you do have to prove that they're struggling nutritionally. This is easy. You can be like, they're overweight, they have anemia. I mean, everyone has something a little bit wrong nutritionally in this country, so that's pretty easy to meet. But you do have to show all this. The only thing with WIC is it's for very specific people, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and children under 5. And National School Lunch Program, very similar, again, based on a family's income. And then the child nutrition is just, again, based on income and if you're in Head Start, which is state-funded preschool. And so all of this is based on the poverty guidelines, which are really tight. Whenever I see these, I always think, oh my gosh. And so the poverty guidelines is really what changes the food security in this country. On these programs, SNAP is just that, it's supplemental. And so it's meant to be 70% of a monthly household income on food. So it's supposed to buy 70% of your food and you're supposed to fund the other 30%. SNAP is most any food except recently, starting in 2026 with the Trump administration. Now I don't tend to be political, but I'll be a somewhat political right now. I don't usually like what Donald Trump is doing, but I am a little bit intrigued about what's happening in 2026. For the first time, a few states are going to start banning certain foods that can be bought on SNAP, and most of it is candy and soda, to no longer allow SNAP to buy candy and soda. And so I'll be interested to see if that improves health or not. WIC is only for healthy food, and it's usually the food is just sent to you. You don't have to purchase it. And then the school lunch programs have to meet nutritional standards, things like that. They're highly criticized for how poor the nutritional standards are. And what guides these programs are dietary guidelines. So our dietary guidelines are what these programs have to follow. So all that, how does that impact our current landscape? So what all that farming and everything means and guaranteed commodities, what this equates to is a whole lot of grains and sweeteners and less veggies. So these charts, and I don't expect you to read them verbatim. If you look, it means that our farms are producing more and more grains, more and more sweeteners, and less vegetables. And so what does that equate to? It's one of the big reasons why we're seeing more and more ultra-processed food. And so here you see that in the American diet, we are consuming more and more of our calories from ultra-processed food. And this is across several demographics. And so I pulled race and ethnicity and age for this demographic, but it's similar across many demographics that you're seeing a rise in ultra-processed food. From 2001 to 2018, 53% to 57%. And a decrease in our minimally processed food, 32% all the way down to 27%. Which means more difficult to find good diet quality, although diet quality is ticking up. So more and more people are trying to eat better, but we still have a really high amount of people not eating the best diet. So when you look at diet quality compared to race and ethnicity, you see that non-Hispanic white people, these little squares right here, have some of the best diet quality. Now this graph is poor diet quality, so you see they have some of the lowest poor diet quality, not compared to our non-Hispanic Asian populations, which has some of the best diet quality. But then you see that non-Hispanic Black right here, or excuse me, right here, have some of the poorest diet quality. Now you do see it improving, but unfortunately the proportion of our community in America with ideal diet quality is only 1.58%. It's really bad. Intermediate is better. That's where most of us live, in an intermediate diet quality. So, typically you see diet quality very interwoven with social determinants of health. Um, typically you see really pretty big differences in diet quality based on social determinants of health. And I'll show you a little bit more on that in a second. And so you're wondering what is impacting all these food choices. It's not just government, right? There's a whole lot of things that impact these food choices that make us choose these processed foods, these ultra processed foods, and these, really intense sweeteners, things like that. And so I'm going to just focus on the environmental factors. And really that comes from time, affordability, accessibility, and availability. When I say time, it means that it takes more time. So one study showed that it took about 203% more time to prepare less processed meals. So this little pizza here, where you have veggies and a lot less saturated fat, a lot less salt compared to this DiGiorno meal. So time is a big factor. Accessibility. So how close you are to a store, how easy it is to get that store. In 2019, so a few years ago, but probably probably similar, if not a little bit worse, 27% of Americans lived in a low income area and a low access area, meaning difficult to get food and probably not high quality food. That's a large percent of America having difficulty with accessibility. We also have affordability issues. So this is so depressing to me, to everyone. But between 2020 and 2024, we saw a 23.6% rise in food prices. Overall, 21% rise in our consumer price index. So that's looking at things like recreation, medical care, things like that. So we saw this skyrocketing cost of food, and that means our affordability is going down. So affordability, meaning you have money, but maybe all your money is going to rent and it's going to bills and healthcare. And so the affordability is getting more difficult as well. And you see those with the lowest income have the highest amount of their money going towards food, but they're spending the least. So really struggling to make positive food choices. This means they're living on ramen, they're living on mac cheese, the $1, $2 items in the grocery store. This is common with accessibility, where maybe they only have the Dollar Tree. They don't have a car, so they have to walk to the Dollar Tree and buy what's at the Dollar Tree, really limiting their ability to be healthy. And so commonly, cost is listed as the #1 reason people cannot make healthier food choices. And I'll say, without any studies, just anecdotally from my experience, this is absolutely what people tell me over and over and over again, is that the cost is what's preventing them from managing their disease. So there's a lot of things leading into this, and what this results in is our super high food insecurity rates. So in the US, so we had 12.3% on SNAP, but we actually have 14.3% experiencing food insecurity. So food insecurity is defined differently depending on who you ask. I personally prefer the World Health Organization's definition opposed to the USDA's because the World Health Organization specifies that it should be nutritious food that they have, where the USDA just defines it as consistent, dependable access to enough food for active, healthy lifestyle. I think that's a little, I don't know, letting them off a little easy personally. And the troubling thing about these food security numbers is 37%, so a good chunk, are above that SNAP threshold. They don't qualify for SNAP, so they're not getting the social support. And then even when people are on SNAP, they still report that food insecurity, likely because it's only covering 70% of the food cost. And so they're still short of these food costs. And so what does that mean? So that means that this really changes the food insecurity based on our social determinants of health. And when we have low food insecurity, we have poor diet quality. And that's one of the key drivers of our diet choices and quality is that cost, is that time. And so when we look at food security based on social determinants of health, we see the biggest factor is income. It's money, right? Followed closely behind that is being a single mother, being a single parent, and then also race and ethnicity. What's not listed on here is education level, certainly where you live. So inside a principal city, we see much higher levels of food insecurity and poor diet quality in non-metropolitan areas, so rural and urban, not so much in the suburbs, but that very rural has very low food security, and that very, very urban can have, or I'm sorry, high food insecurity, and that very, very urban can have high food insecurity. So how to improve this in 1 minute or less? There's a lot of things to do. My personal opinion is to protect SNAP. And right now, I think that's more important than ever. And to expand SNAP, to advocate for these budgets and allocations and taxes towards our food programs, because we really see this helping the most people. We already have SNAP for 41 million people. We could improve SNAP to allow for 100% of the food budget. We can allow for the people experiencing food insecurity to qualify. So supporting that farm bill is really important. Advocating for wealth equity. Study after study after study shows what really determines food quality, food choice, is cost. People need more money if they want to eat healthier. Supporting food sovereignty. So food sovereignty is a movement to allow, really coming from the Native communities, but expanding outside of the Native communities at this point, allowing people to control their own food system. So deregulating and allowing for small farmers to come, for hunting and fishing to come back, to allow for control of smaller food systems rather than these massive food systems where you end up with applesauce that's far more expensive than if you had just bought some apples. And I will provide you guys with some resources on some food sovereignty in the USA, some stories about how this is going. Supporting small farmers, and of course, educating on healthful diet choices always helps, but I always want education on a budget. So it's really terrible that we've seen SNAP Ed defunded this year. It was one of our principal programs of educating on nutrition on a budget. But supporting these programs are really how we can see improved access and improved diet quality. That's it.
This is a very important slide. If we have a minute to,
Yes.
I don't want to interrupt you if you have more to say, but this is a very important.
No, please interrupt me.
So yeah, catch your breath. This has been quite a lot of information. I will be honest with you. I feel like I have just been educated like a lot, and I'm going to listen to this again because, and I hope my students do the same. There is a lot of important information that you shared about the history of, of the United States related to food safety, food policies, how and why the Farm Bill exists, and the importance of support programs, how the government is indeed impacting the lives of everyday people, especially those who are poor and who need support, but also how it supports farmers. Indeed, as you said, um, an industry and work that is uncertain, right? That has a lot of uncertainty. And so I learned a lot today, a lot of things that I sort of had a little bit of information about. I now have a lot more. So I appreciate what you're saying, what you have said. I want to stay on this slide because indeed, you know, the presentation for today was not help us solve all the problems related to food sovereignty and food safety and food
Wish
related.
I had all the answers. I can't say I have them.
No, I know. And perhaps we will allot another hour for you to tell us all your thoughts more about this. But for now, the reason why I want to focus on this particular list of topics that are important to you, and they are important to me as well, is that a lot of them have to do with advocacy, with understanding the history and the programs, with understanding policies, understanding how particular, understanding the politics around passing particular laws or reducing the availability of programs such as SNAP, for example. And I think recognizing this and having our students, especially, and here I'm going to make an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, but recognizing all that and supporting our graduate students and our students in nutrition and dietetics to appreciate how educating on a healthful diet choices on a budget is just a small part of the larger picture.
Yes.
That is a whole lot more about social factors, understanding politics, understanding policies, and advocating for all kinds of things that perhaps are less tangible than I'm going to put together a healthful diet choice on a budget, which has a spreadsheet and it's a tangible thing. But all these other pieces, right, are so important in making that particular task relevant, meaningful, right, and supportive.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that because so I have two side hustles, Christina. I'm always side hustling. So I have one side hustle where I'm actually licensed in Oregon to practice nutrition and be a dietitian. And it was this random program that came around and I said yes. And so that's where I work virtually with people on Medicare. There's a program in Oregon. It's part of a food security program that I ended up contracting with. And so every time they meet with a dietitian, they get $25 to spend on Instacart to get money to eat healthy food, but it's only healthy food. And so I work for this program to help people put that together. And so with my lower income clients, that their lives are completely controlled by the dollar, by SNAP. Most of them do not allocate any funds other than SNAP. So they're working with that 70%. And so we'll try to do things to change, you know, what can they get? But often it is things like something that we'll come up with and, you know, close your little dietitian ears. I don't know. But so taking the ramen package, because ramen is a staple in a lot of people's diets when they're low income, and cutting the ramen package in half and doing half ramen and half canned peas, which is tastes okay if you've ever tried it. It's a struggle meal for sure, but it allows for more fiber. And so if you're struggling with diabetes, but you don't want to just eat peas, you can combine a grain, which the ramen still has this amino acid profile of a grain. And then you can combine it with a lentil and you get a full amino acid profile. And so canned peas are typically less than $1 and ramen's less than $1. So you can cut them in half and make $1 meal. And then you have a full protein without being protein deficient. And you also get fiber. And then if you really have some money, you can add an egg. And then you get even more protein, trying to make that full thing. So you can wiggle and educate with your lower income, but really it's just so dollar driven. Now I have another side hustle where I work with people that are private pay, and I do get way more money to work with them. Um, and let me tell you, I can come up with some fabulous diet plans, and they don't include ramen. So it is really different just on what population you're working with. When you're talking about social determinants of health, you're definitely in the ramen and peas crowd. So it just depends on what audience you're working on to think about what's really going to change the diet. My experience as a dietitian, when people have resources, they want to eat healthy. They want to. Maybe they don't. Maybe they make poor food choices, but they would like to eat healthy, and they commonly eat healthier. And that's what the statistics. So the more money someone has, the healthier they eat.
Yeah, thank you. I love hearing about your side hustles, as you call them. In just the minute that we have left here today, I do want to have you speak to the graduate students of our university and other universities that may hear this particular presentation, because I think it's terrifically relevant and important to recognize, I'm going to say this again, to recognize how important it is to understand the history and the development of particular bills, and why it is important to, as you create education and healthy meals and diet choices with your population, to understand that your profession is also about the political, the policy.
Yes, very, very much so. In fact, the Michigan Dietetics Association, which I'm a part of, we actually hold a legislative day every day in the spring where dietitians are asked to come to Lansing and advocate for food rights, for nutrition coverage, for protecting our profession, and really pushing for food programs that allow for more food security, that allow for better access to food and nutrition programs. So the nutrition students on this know that I send out an invite every year to go to Lansing and attend my and legislation day. So it's Michigan and Academy Nutrition Dietetics Legislation Day, and advocate for our food programs in Michigan to ensure that they know that there's people out there that really care about this, that it is important, and there are professionals that want these things.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been truly educational and very important. I'm hoping that students are inspired by especially this slide that supports some of the ways forward for us, as well as, of course, go deeper and dig deeper into some of your other slides and information and resources that you provide on this slide deck, so that they can understand really the multiple social determinants of health and how indeed they impact one's choice.
Yes.
That it is indeed much more than just an individual choice, that it is in fact impacted not only by your income and your education level, but whether you're a single parent or not, what race you are and ethnicity, right? Where you live keeps coming back as such an important aspect, right? And also how the state, the local and federal governments regulate or support particular farming technologies and crop productions and availabilities of resources, especially when it comes to food programs. So there is a lot here, and you did a
So
fabulous
much.
job. Thank you.
I feel like I told you, I was like, I don't know how to cut this down. I feel like I was like,
this is great. I really appreciate it, and I thank you so much.
thank you for having me. Goodbye to everyone. Thank you for listening. And I hope you found this insightful and helpful. And I hope you look into it more. I will provide a list of good resources if you are interested in reading more about the history and how things are currently, how do you get these changes? How do you get more money? You ask for more money on the farm bill. That's how you get more money. And unfortunately, you know, according to the budgetary house right now, it's being defunded, which kind of breaks my heart as a dietitian, but we will rise from this too.
Yes, things change. That's the only constant.
Right, Christina, thank you so much.
Thank you.